when we say the Civil War is about slavery, what we're saying is, see all this gray over here? Alta California. Let's go to full screen. Isn't that a great map? Alta California. This used to be Mexico. This all used to be Mexico. Right here. This gray area, when it's acquired from Mexico, reopens the slavery issue. Remember the Louisiana Purchase, right? All of this stuff in here. All of this stuff. That the issue of slavery there was settled by the Missouri Compromise. What's going to happen when territory is acquired from Mexico? The issue of slavery is going to come back up shortly thereafter. The agreement in the Missouri Compromise that dealt with the Louisiana Purchase is going to be itself compromised. People are going to try to get rid of it with something else. The idea is you have all of this land here. People want to move there. Businesses, there's mining, railroads, all sorts of possible endeavors that could happen here. Not to mention the fact that average people want to move out here and live on their own piece of land with their families. Now, if slavery is allowed there, all of these folks in the South, the North thinks will move over here to the gray area, buy up all the good land or settle on good land, work it with slave labor. There won't be any jobs. And once they start working land with slave labor, that it's going to be predominantly agricultural. There's not going to be any sort of, lumber industry or mining industry or, for coal or silver, whatever, quicksilver, all sorts of stuff, right? Yeah. So the main issue is some people, for example, some people will tell you the Civil War was about tariffs, which is complete. It's just stupid. It's insanely inaccurate. Because the tariff wasn't the Republicans in 1860 when Lincoln is elected president. He's not even president yet. He's not even able to change the tariff, and the Confederate states, the Southern states, have already rebelled and they've already formed their own country. So that's silly. But just for the sake of argument, right? Let's say tariffs were the reason for the war. The primary reason was tariffs. Slavery influenced people's views on tariffs, right? In the South, tariffs. This is what tariffs do. They protect American products, manufactured products mostly. So people involved in the North in manufacturing, textiles, in the early industrialization process, they wanted protective tariffs because they were directly invested in working for a company or owning a company. In the South, which is predominantly agricultural, they don't see the need for that at all. So, and this is a generalization. There are people in the South who were, supported stronger tariffs, and people in the North who wanted weaker tariffs. There's variation on this, but this is a general thing. So, slavery really defined the way that North and South evolved as societies. Does that mean that one was better than the other or morally superior? No, I wouldn't say that at all. I would not say that as a teacher, but the slavery issue does define them as two different groups, two different regions developing differently, which eventually comes to conflict in this area. So we have the idea of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is a term that comes around in the 1840s. The idea, we have the United States, which starts over here in the white, right? It's 13 colonies. Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence. No, not in the Declaration, I'm sorry. Jefferson, it was in 1790, it was much later, my apologies. Jefferson believed that Native Americans, their only hope for their own civilization was to move west, beyond the Mississippi. The Mississippi River is right in here somewhere. To move beyond there, right? Ethnic cleansing. This is ethnic cleansing. The idea is that this is a Protestant, this is a Anglo, right? Anglo nation. This is ethnic nationalism. We talked about it. During the 1840s, territorial expansion came to be seen as proof of the innate superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. This is something that's happening from the founding of this country, but the idea of manifest destiny states that, or believes that America is destined, right? Destiny. We are destined to occupy the entire continent, right? John Winthrop from once gave mentioned the idea of a shining city on a hill. That Plymouth for Massachusetts Bay Colony would be an example for the world, a light for the world. In Manifest Destiny, we have, okay, we've settled here, we've set this example for the world, but instead of just leading by example, we're actually just going to take over a huge part of the world, right? We're the ones that are living the right way. We are Christian. We are living in a free market society. They thought, relatively speaking, in a democratic society, this is the best society you could possibly have. Obviously, this is mostly white guys saying this, but so if there are people in the way, if there are people west, if there are Native Americans, if there's Spanish territory, later Mexican territory, right? We know that God wants us to conquer these people, to take this land, to make it a part of the United States, because the United States is so much better, right? Similar situation to the way that Native Americans were dealt with, the idea that we can use the land better because we can develop it in ways in a capitalist society that has not been done in Native American society. So bigger, right? Bigger is not always better. That's what she said. Okay, cut that part out. Anyways, so let's cut through this. Texas independence. Texas actually becomes independent in 1836. Texas is its own country for 9 years. The Lone Star Republic. It was once a part of Mexico. When Mexico achieves independence from Spain in 1821, the Mexican Empire nation runs from the California border with Oregon, which is right up here, all the way down to present-day Panama, way down in Central America. And there's some pockets, but it's all connected. It's one of the 10 largest continuous empires in the history of humanity, right? But it only lasts very briefly. See, 15 years after their independence, a group of white Americans, which had been immigrating into Texas, remember that, white Americans are immigrating into Texas and breaking the law when they get there because they're bringing slaves. Slavery is outlawed in Mexico in 1829. So in the 1830s, white Americans are crossing the border into Mexico and breaking the law. Just remember that. Hashtag Donald Trump. Okay? There was also some issue with at first these settlers. This is where we get the Alamo from. Remember the Alamo, right? You have these Sam Houston and Bowie, and not David Bowie, Jim Bowie, I think his name was, Davy Crockett, right? Or is it Davy Crockett? Yeah, all these guys, right? And all these different folks are coming into Texas, acquiring land. Many of them are bringing slaves, which is illegal. There's issues with paying taxes on the land, I believe, and then the Mexican government, and which had originally welcomed this idea. They thought, hey, some wealthy Americans are going to come in, and this is cool. We'll make some money off of the land, and blah blah blah. Eventually, they see this is a situation where these folks could end up becoming taking over, becoming very wealthy and powerful, right? Within this part of the land, part of the continent that's Mexico. Sound familiar? So there's conflict there. Eventually, this army of Santa Anna does the whole Alamo thing, where these Americans are refusing. They're basically breaking the law. They're refusing to comply with the requests of the Mexican government. This conflict ensues, and this group of the Alamo is wiped out. After this group of the Alamo, there's a battle or something, and they're wiped out. Eventually, though, there's these Americans, many other Americans too, probably join them. They organize, they defeat the Mexican army of Santa Anna. They end up declaring independence in Texas, which is where the Texas flag is, right here. It's not the original borders of Texas. Okay, they declare a Lone Star Republic, which lasts for 9 years, at which point it is annexed. Texas is annexation in 1845. After the election of James K. Polk. James K. Polk is president throughout this annexation and then into the Mexican-American War. James K. Polk. I'm actually using earbuds with a microphone that are Polk. They're not designed by his family, though. He was just a president. So this fits into this idea of manifest destiny. Around 1845 is the time where the actual phrase manifest destiny started getting used. And the idea that let's just keep pushing. Let's just keep pushing. We need to get all the way to the Pacific. And don't worry who's in the way. God wants us to do this. Right? So Texas becomes independent, but this is the original Texas, right? It's much smaller. And then there's this wonderful river right here where the current border is called the Rio Grande. And way over here, Mexico is still in possession of California. They had not discovered gold in California yet. California has the with the San Francisco Bay and other areas. It's a very vital port region, right? Remember, across this ocean, you have Asia, which is going. If you a few generations after this in 17B, you'll learn about how the Philippines and China and Japan and all these countries, the U.S. comes into contact with all these countries, right? And it's related to the same thing: expansion. The economy is expanding, the population is expanding, the country is expanding in size, and then its influence around the world. And so California is really an essential, seen as a very essential place. It's also it's a very fertile place. There's a lot of crops that are produced in California, not the same ones that we produce today. The two biggest crops in California are grapes and pot. But there used to be a lot of other stuff too. So the United States wants all this territory and wants access, and this manifest destiny thing fits into the fact that California is known to be a valuable place. So and also we just want more territory, and we want Texas to be a little bigger. So we send troops with a guy named Zachary Taylor, who's a general in the Army. And we cross over this border. We basically say to Mexico, hey, we think the border is to the Rio Grande. That's where the Texas border is. Mexico says no. So we march troops across into this disputed area, knowing that it would potentially provoke a fight, which it does. And that's how the Mexican-American War starts. It's a land grab. It's basically a land grab. There's no United Nations back then to condemn it. There's no global council, right? Even if there were, we probably wouldn't listen to them anyways. And it's not as if the folks in California don't really identify with the government in Mexico City, which is way down here, right? Californians refer to themselves as Californios. Pio Pico is the last governor of California when it's part of Mexico. It's only been a part of Mexico really for 20 years, right? It was Spain before that. They don't really identify. I mean, this is really far from like San Francisco, San Jose. Let's go with San Jose. San Jose, which is a town incorporated, it's established in 1777. So 1845, 46, this is 75 years later, roughly. There's a long distance between San Jose and Mexico City. It's a 6-hour flight. It's like flying to New York. So a 6-hour flight today. They didn't have planes back then. So there's this border dispute. The army of Zachary Taylor is up here fighting, I believe, against Santa Anna initially. And Santa Anna is an interesting guy. He's almost like a Pancho Villa type or a Zapata type, where they're regionally, they control a faction, right? Or what you call parochial. They're maybe regional, or they maybe have a strong support but not a majority support. There's a Mexican government which is very disorganized in some ways, and so in some, Santa Anna has the military power, and so his role as general but also as a political leader is really fuzzy. It's a interesting place. It's an interesting situation, and they're vulnerable basically too to something like this from the U.S. So Zachary Taylor's army is up here fighting Santa Anna. It's not going swiftly, right? We don't just march straight down into Mexico City. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but they're bogged down basically. So we decide to launch an amphibious invasion. Amphibious meaning over water, similar to what like the Allied invasion in D-Day on a smaller scale. We basically sail from New Orleans, right, which is in Louisiana. Sail from New Orleans down. We land in Veracruz. This army is under the command of General Winfield Scott. Serving in this army with him is also a young Robert E. Lee, who is going to be a Confederate general. Lots of generals from the Civil War. This is the only combat experience they had. This is the only, other than a handful of Indian wars that some of them fought. This is the only combat experience that a lot of folks have. Grant, Lee, on both sides, North and South. Stonewall Jackson, Beauregard, Meade, all sorts of folks. Okay, so this, Winfield Scott's army lands at Veracruz, marches in, wins several battles on its way to Mexico City, eventually occupies Mexico City in 1847. And a peace treaty is signed in 18. I should have gone to this slide. So I already wrote it. And this part here up top is true. This is the Mexican-American War is basically like we say casually, well, this used to be part of Mexico. There was this little war that was fought. This is in many ways, still a very bitter part of history for Mexico. They lost a huge amount of territory, about a third of their country. And there are, people say that Cinco de Mayo is an American holiday. It's not really celebrated in Mexico, right? It's a Mexican-American holiday. That's somewhat true. There are streets named after Cinco de Mayo, right, in the main center city square of Mexico City. But nothing is, there are the monuments you'll see for the Mexican-American War or the Mexican War, the monuments you see. I mean, Mexico City is under siege. The U.S. Army invades it and occupies their capital, right? There are monuments everywhere. There's a monument called, let's look for it. It's the Los Niños Heroes. It's the 6 children. These 6, they were in like a youth brigade at Chapultepec, which is like this castle in Mexico City that was converted into a fort. And these 6 youths, they were kind of like in an auxiliary, apparently helped defend Mexico City and fell to their death from this. It's just, sort of martyrdom, basically. They were martyrs for the cause of defending Mexico City. And they have statues all over. Well, let me see if I can find it's the Los Niños. Let me really quick. Bear with me. Los Niños Heroes. Yes. There we go. See this? Dia de los Niños Heroes. Child heroes or heroic cadets. The day honors heroes of the 1847 Battle of Chapultepec. I said it right. During the Mexican-American War. I actually have some pictures of Chapultepec. I was there. If you want some, I can send them. We can just look it up right now, but we'll do that later. I'll share my picture in an email because I got some decent ones. It's really beautiful, actually. Okay. So, Mexico City is occupied in September of 1847. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is February of 1848. It's a few months later, right? There's a military victory, after which diplomats go to work. We send in diplomats, people who today would come from the State Department, who negotiate a treaty. In this treaty, Mexico, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they are militarily defeated. Their capital city is occupied. They really have very little choice. They sign over in this treaty for a nominal fee. I think it was a few $1 million. Let me see. Let's look that one up because I want to be sure. I'm going to say it's $15 million. The Louisiana Purchase was $15 million. Cost of price for territory. I'm not seeing it here. Look it up somewhere. It's a huge amount of land. We didn't pay a lot for it. Hey, that's me again. That's not me. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico cedes. They surrender control over to the United States. California, Colorado, Utah, parts of New Mexico, parts of Wyoming, parts of Arizona, and the rest of the other area of Texas, right? So California had actually had whites living there, white Americans who had revolted and had what's called a bear flag revolt. And for less than a year, they were their own country too. So they actually had their own thing going. And then they were annexed, in this treaty, basically they became a part of the United States, right? This is a massive amount of land. A lot of it is below the Mason-Dixon line, right, where slavery can still exist. So the acquisition of new land reopened the question of slavery's expansion. There's which this is congressional debate, right? What should we do with this new territory? An early one was the Wilmot Proviso. It's named after David Wilmot, which basically says no slavery in any of this territory, right? Strangle slavery. It's almost like the policy of containment against the Soviet Union in the 20th century. Like containment of, this is what Lincoln believed. You contain slavery where it exists, and at some point it's going to just they're going to have to change. They're going to have to end slavery. They're not going to they're going to have less political power in the federal government, so slave owners want to keep pushing west and expanding slavery. The Wilmot Proviso says no slavery in any of this territory. Whatever becomes a state eventually, slavery cannot exist. That is not passed. It's way too controversial. It's way too radical. It's what's called radical Republican. Eventually, these guys are Whigs, but I shouldn't go into that even. What happens is the Compromise of 1850. How long is this hangout? How long have I been filming? This is probably way too long.